Now you're good to go.
Okay, good morning, everybody. It is 8:30 on July 11th, 2024. Welcome to the Lower Downtown Design Review Commission meeting. We will kick off with some introductions. This time I'll start with Jim.
Jim Gravener, resident.
John McIntyre at large.
Heather Vasquez Johnson, practicing architect and chair.
Fred Glick, building owner, I think I am.
Andy Duckett, MK Preservation Architect and Co-Chair.
Nick Allen, developer.
And I'm Brittany Bryant, Denver Landmark Preservation staff.
Okay, great. Before we get started, up on the screen for anybody who is joining us virtually, you will see some audio tips for those who are joining on the Zoom. So for better sound quality, please make sure that you download Zoom on your desktop, laptop, tablet, on your mobile device. Click your audio settings, which will bring up an additional menu. Try to add a background noise suppression and then test your speaker and microphone. For anybody that is presenting as an applicant or joining for public comment when it is your turn to speak, to mute or unmute, please click the microphone icon at the bottom of the screen. If you expand that menu, you will get additional options, which will help you select speaker and microphone devices if you're using a headset or anything like that. And if you're still having audio challenges, please switch to phone for audio. So the first item on the agenda, we have two meeting records for approval. The meeting records from May 2nd, 2024 and June 6th, 2024. Does any commission members have edits or modifications to those meeting minutes? I am not seeing any, so those can be accepted. Next item on the agenda, we have one item on consent agenda today. I will call for what that is. I will ask if any commissioners would like to move those items from the consent agenda to regular design review. If anybody has a conflict of interest, they will let us know, and then we will take a motion and vote. So this morning, we've got one item. It is item number 2024-COA-389, 1475 16th Street Market Station for a projecting sign. Do any commission members wish to pull that off of the consent agenda this morning? And if not, would somebody care to make a motion? Andy?
I move to approve the consent agenda for July 11th with item number 2024-COA-389, 1475 16th Street Market Station.
Thank you, Andy. Do we have a second? John? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, that passes unanimously. If you are joining us virtually for the consent agenda, congratulations. Your item has passed and you're free to continue your morning. Next item on our agenda is a business item. We've got one item today on that. Brittany or other staff will kind of introduce the business item. We can ask questions. We can open it up to public comment. I don't know that we'll have any based on what the business item is, but we'll open it up for public comment, take staff clarifications, have commission deliberation and a motion and vote. So business item for today is an adjustment to the August meeting dates.
So the majority of Landmark staff, and particularly the Landmark staff that staff this meeting, will be at the National Alliance for Preservation Conferences biannual conference on August 1st. In consultation with the attorneys, they have advised the commission to cancel the August 1st and the second regularly scheduled overflow meeting on August 8th and hold a special meeting on August 8th. However, the filing deadline was Tuesday, and as far as Crystal and I know, who mostly staff this commission, we don't actually have any items, so it's unlikely we would have a meeting in August in any case, but we officially meet with all 10 of staff to set the agenda this afternoon. So we are requesting, just because so many of us will be in Florida, that we adjust the meeting schedule slightly for August. And you do officially need to make a motion and vote on this item. Okay, if that sounds good to y'all.
Great. Thank you, Brittany. I will ask if there's any public comment on this business discussion item. Two people joining virtually. If you would like to speak on this, please raise your hand. Okay, I'm not seeing any, so we'll close public comment, open up commission deliberation. Does anybody have any?
I'm gone on the 8th, so that's my that's my deliberation. Do we have enough folks that can step in?
Well, it sounds like that meeting is probably not gonna happen.
It may not
Anyway.
happen anyway.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
I
unlikely.
have no objections. I'm available if it needs to happen.
Me too.
No, I'll be in a business trip on the 1st, so unfortunately I will not be in sunny Florida, I'll be in Idaho.
Idaho
Be
has
nicer right now.
potatoes.
It's like 100 degrees.
Okay, well, Amy's not here, but barring Amy's input, would someone care to make a motion? There's a suggested motion on the screen.
I move to cancel the August 1st and August 8th, 2024 meeting dates and hold a special meeting on August 8th, 2024.
Thank you, Fred. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you, Jim. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, business item passes unanimously. Do we have minutes to discuss on business? Okay, so we are moving into discussion items. Sorry, there we go. I will discuss what our discussion item is today. Staff will make a formal introduction. We will have open discussion, and because this is just a discussion item, no actions or votes will be taken today. So the item on our discussion agenda today is the Old City Hall view plane and Ball Arena redevelopment.
And then typically no public comment on
Okay.
discussion items, but if you as the commission would like to do like that, that's totally
Okay,
acceptable.
great. Thank you, Brittany. Okay,
Do you guys wanna?
Where can
staff
we
up to
join
the
you?
table.
And once you turn on the camera, I'll share so you can control the PowerPoint.
Okay.
In theory, you're in control now.
Give that too much control. Too much control. Let's get back to the beginning here, sorry. All right. So I'm Tony Lechuga. I am a senior planner in CPD's planning services. I'll let Stephen introduce himself and he's gonna kick us off with our presentation.
I see where the camera is now. So, good morning, thanks for having us here. So my name is Stephen Wilson and I'm a project coordinator of community planning and development. So we're here today to talk a little bit about the Ball Arena project, only as an orientation, and then the focus is on the proposed modification to the view plane. And so I think the last time we were here, the Kroenke Sports and Entertainment team gave a presentation on the proposed pedestrian bridge over Spear Boulevard. And that is still gonna be presented in the future. But now we're working on the rezoning, the view plane modification, development agreement, and a Metro District service plan. So I think we're all familiar with the project and the context, so I'm just gonna zoom by some of these, but wanted to just sort of give an orientation. So the project is currently zoned in former chapter 59. They're gonna bring that into the Denver zoning code. The site is about 74 acres, and then it's part of the downtown area plan amendment. So they're proposing to keep the arena in the existing location, and do infill development around that existing arena. So you can see this is from their infrastructure master plan that's currently under review. But it's a mix of residential, retail, office, hotel, and also entertainment, which isn't listed here. So this I'm really just showing because I think it's a fun graphic to look at. But in the foreground, the lighter color is Ball Arena, and in the more background, the shaded buildings, that is River Mile. So this is significant because of the amount of infill development that will be in downtown and really an extension of the existing downtown. And now I'll turn this back over to Tony.
All right, and so the real reason we're here to talk to you today is to discuss the Old City Hall view plane, which has its origin point at 14th and Larimer, which is inside the historic district. But as you can see, has kind of a big impact on development potential on the Ball Arena site. So it starts on the right, that 14th and Larimer. The view plane terminates at Federal Boulevard to the west. And you can see covers a large area that is the Auraria Higher Education campus, Ball Arena, and the Mile High Stadium. There is one exception to the view plane, which was written in 1999 to allow the current Mile High Stadium to actually be built taller than the view plane would normally allow. That is to date the only exception to the view plane. So again, the reason that we're bringing it here is that you can see everything in purple on the screen is a historic landmark district. And you can see both Spear Boulevard itself as well as Lower Downtown are historic districts. And in particular, this is part of that historic urban edge district. So a small part of the view plane is within that space. Now, we are bringing it before you because there's this very specific language from the Downtown Area Plan Amendment, which was passed in 2018, which said to analyze the effectiveness of this view plane once we have design standards and guidelines in place, and consider removing the view plane if we have new tools that effectively enhance key views and render the view plane obsolete. So down at the bottom, I summarized that into two things. One is start by analyzing the view plane to see, is it still effective? And two, we needed to create some design standards and guidelines. And in doing those two things, we could potentially consider removing the view plane. So you can see everything in the map in pink is the area of the Downtown Area Plan Amendment, including everything in orange, which is the KSE Ball Arena site. So we started doing those two things. In analyzing the effectiveness of the view plane, this is a view from the origin point, where the old City Hall was. I took the photo in 2003. The red line running through the image is where effectively the view plane is supposed to cap heights. The upside down V is where Mile High Stadium received its exception from the view plane. And then you can see the buildings outlined in blue are everything that the Auraria campus has built over the past 10 to 15 years. As a state enterprise, Auraria is not obligated to follow our zoning rules, and they have taken that option. They chose to promote density closer to downtown, closer to the intersection of Spear and Auraria. And as a result, we have seen that this view plane is effectively obsolete. It is no longer preserving a mountain view. So step one of the Downtown Area Plan guidance, we can say, yes, this view plane is obsolete. The other guidance was to create design standards and guidelines. These were finalized in 2021, they were updated in 2023, and they do encompass this entire area once it is rezoned into the Denver zoning code. And I highlighted just one particular piece of guidance from those guidelines, which does say that for building massings in upper stories, we should incorporate opportunities to frame key views. And it lists such as streets or visual corridors, major intersections, bridges, transit nodes, important parks, plazas, or open spaces, or in subsection D, the Rocky Mountains or the river. So we actually see the design standards and guidelines as a more effective tool for protecting key views, because rather than just protecting that one view looking west towards the Rocky Mountains, we can utilize these standards to protect all sorts of views, those into Lower Downtown, those of the river, important buildings on the Auraria campus, or in other parts of the city. So we believe that we have met the two standards of the Downtown Area Plan Amendment guidance. The view plane's obsolete, and we have new tools that can help us effectively enhance views. So what we're recommending is kind of a light touch. We're recommending an amendment to the Denver Revised Municipal Code, which is where all the rules and regulations around view planes live, to say that parcels with this specific zone district, downtown, Central Platte Valley, Center, or DCPVC, that have these applicable design standards and guidelines shall be exempt from the requirements of the view plane. And I'll show you exactly why we chose that sort of light touch. So right now, there's only one part of the city that has that DCPVC zoning. And it's across the consolidated main line for Ball Arena in the River Mile proposed development where Elitch Gardens is. So you can see inside the view plane, it would be that sort of, I don't know, brownish, orangish color that sort of sticks down right between the consolidated main line and I-25 and the river. So a very small section of zoning would immediately be impacted and say that is no longer limited by the view plane. The other area that would be affected is everything in orange that is part of the Ball Arena site that is within the view plane. So we would only be touching those areas because those are the only areas where we have design standards and guidelines. Those apply only to the DCPV zone districts. So we would not be touching anything outside of that zone, the current DCPVC and the Ball Arena site. And we can sort of guarantee that this remains true because our downtown area plan amendment zoning guidance is very specific about where DCPV districts should be applied. And there are 3 of them. One of them is the river district, which on our map applies only near the river. One of those is a transition district, which was designed very specifically for that far western edge of the property near Jefferson Park and for the intersection of Spear and Auraria, where we're closer to Lodo. And that transition district was designed to have smaller buildings that actually create that transition to lower heights and potentially lower densities. And then the center district is designed very much for where it's already applied to River Mile and where we would apply it for the Ball Arena site. And so we would only be saying this area where we have the center district would be allowed to exceed the height maximums of the view plane. And the biggest reason for this, as you can see in the graphic on the bottom, there are 3 different building forms in the center district: the general, standard tower, and the point tower. All of those in their base form only allow a building to be 5 stories or 70 feet. So in that scenario, the view plane doesn't matter. But all of them are allowed to build to much higher heights when they meet particular incentives. In this case, the incentives are the provision of significant affordable housing above what is required from EHA. So if we remove the view plane, we would be allowing them to tap into this additional height that is associated with providing affordable housing. That's exactly what we see here. These are all illustrative. These are not exact numbers. These were us attempting to see if we left the view plane in place, such as in the image on the left, and those heights were limited to about 60 to 95 feet, we would see significantly fewer affordable housing units than if we remove the view plane from this part of the area and allow them to tap into those incentives. So we might see potentially, twice as many affordable units by removing the view plane. It allows them to tap into those incentive heights, which we think is a benefit to the city. So in summary, I want to emphasize we're proposing an amendment to the municipal code that just removes this particular zone district, DCPVC. While the view plane does include is part of the lower downtown historic district, this action would have no effect on those designs, on that district and the guidelines that control it. And so as Stephen brought up, we have a number of anticipated actions happening in the next few months. One is we're recommending this amendment to council. The other is establishing a Metro District Service Plan, which would help fund infrastructure improvements to the area as it's built out. The applicants are currently working through a development agreement with the city. The fourth is an arena trust agreement, which would be KSE committing to keeping the basketball and hockey teams in the city longer than they're currently required to. And then the fifth thing is a rezoning. So 5 actions going before council in the next few months. And then you'll notice in the notes column on the bottom right, there is a community group that's negotiating a CBA. The city is not a party to that, and so we don't include it in the actions that council votes on. And then as Stephen brought up, there's a future proposal for right-of-way encroachment for this proposed bridge that they might want to build. That's not being approved now, and that would be some sort of future action that would come before this committee. And then finally, sort of a tentative schedule, very tentative. The one thing that is for certain is that this is going to planning board next week on the 17th. The only item that planning board hears is the rezoning. That's the only action that they vote on of the myriad actions. But then we anticipate this going through the regular council and mayoral schedules with an anticipated public hearing date of September 16th. We're happy to answer any questions that you have about the development in general, about the view plane amendments, anything at all.
Thank you guys. Fred?
I have a question. Thank you very much for the presentation. And I get some of the specifics of why you want to apply it to that area. What's not clear to me is why, if the view plane is obsolete, you're not simply recommending that the view plane be removed from the municipal code altogether.
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's 2 years ago when we embarked on this process, it was one of the options, was removing it entirely. There are a couple of reasons. One is that our plan guidance is very specific, that the view plane should be obsolete and we should have design standards and guidelines to protect views. We only have that for the Central Platte Valley zone districts. So that's the reason one. The second is that we have particular sites, such as the Belt Park site, that has a uniquely written PUD that describes the view plane plus an additional, I think it's 15 degrees in that PUD. We also have the historic urban edge guidelines that reference the view plane. And so in addition to not feeling like we had plan guidance, there were also many other bureaucratic procedural steps that would have to take place, such as rewriting the PUD, rewriting the historic urban edge districts. There's also some concern that the stadium district out by Mile High doesn't have design standards and guidelines at this point. And we felt pretty strongly that if we were to remove the view plane from that site, we would want to make sure that we have similar design standards and guidelines to protect key views, potentially into downtown, potentially of the river. And so we understand there are a number of steps that we would probably take over the next 5 to 10 years to eventually possibly remove the view plane entirely. But this was one step in potentially many.
Thank you. This is just a PR mess. But I guess my question is, and it doesn't impact us much, but do you legit have a group that's meeting with the public or some sort of PR consultant to help you out with? Because I can just see people going, well, that was a stupid move. Why would you have a view plane in the middle of our area to do whatever they wanted? Then the view plane doesn't mean anything. It just snowballs. I could just see your public meetings just turning into an absolute mess.
Yeah, I mean, surprisingly, we've had a number of public meetings and people have been pretty okay and understanding.
Well, it's probably not going to happen until someone's going for a permit. And then the moment you have a schedule, that's when it's going to become an issue. It's just like.
Yeah, I mean, we've also, there's one exception to this view plane, but we've also written similar exceptions to other view planes. So there is precedent for this type of light touch. So it's not like this is a wholly unfounded action the city is taking and never taken before. It's just one that we take, maybe once a decade.
Yeah, my comment is really just curious because from a landmarks district, it's like, oh, the view shed is shot because you can't see the mountains from that place anymore because our area was allowed to do something. So I was just curious, is like, how are you going to combat that except making sure everybody's well fed and caffeinated before a meeting?
Other thoughts?
Oh, it's useful to see. I mean,
Yeah.
we've wrestled our way around that view plane a couple of times, so it's interesting to see the discussion. And, the Auraria thing in my mind makes it pretty moot in some ways.
It's interesting though, too, I think within those master plans, and this is not for anything other than discussion items, that it feels like you've got a guideline, right? You don't have a standard around issues. It's a guide, right? It's a should, not a shall.
Yeah.
And I wonder if there is actually, which is good, from a design standpoint, as long as people are actually engaging with the idea of delivering it. And it would seem logical that within master plans for those districts, there may be particular views, particular moments that should be coming out of the principles of those plans that can become shells rather than shoulds, which I think is leaving that up to the design teams is right. It's just what's the balance of trying to find, ensure those sort of principles are baked into the plans, which I don't think is an issue for the overarching documents, but it's an interesting thing to think through, how you ensure that that type of approach is baked into the plans, because it's, shoulds are kind of easy to design around.
Yeah, I think for this particular area, there's a balance, as you brought up, between they are standards and guidelines, they are not rules and regulations. I think they were intentionally designed that way because we didn't know what was gonna be built here and on what timeline. And so having standards and guidelines allows us more flexibility to work
Negotiate there.
within good design and have some negotiations, but you're right, they are guidelines.
Yeah.
I guess, the one thing I'd say is, given the fact that it's clear that the view plane is obsolete, and I get some of the bureaucratic stuff, but I almost wonder if there's a way to eliminate the view plane and write in something that essentially says, for the purposes of other ordinances which refer to, something like that, because it just, we have a bad habit in Denver of building everything on top of everything else, and we, on all of our codes. And so I worry that we're missing an opportunity to simplify something here. And instead, we're going to keep something in which we acknowledge is obsolete, and we're gonna have other things that refer to it. And so we're gonna continue that pattern a little, in a way. And so I guess I would encourage us to think a little more expansively about how we might clean it up a little bit better. Does that make sense?
But
Fair enough.
I think it requires changing two things, because to Tony's point, like, the requirement is that, we can consider making the view plane obsolete if we do a study and their design standards and guidelines. We would have to remove that requirement of design standards and guidelines in order to make it completely obsolete. So now it's changing two pieces of that.
But it's plan guidance as opposed to a requirement, I think. And it seems to me that then that potentially gives you the tool to say, as we go in and look at these other areas that have existed within the boundaries, that then it might be appropriate to apply design guidelines specifically for those districts. So it's a little bit of a nuance there, but I do think we tend to create bureaucratic certainty. It's kind of our default. And then we're connecting all of these links, in some cases with things that no longer exist. So.
This is also a council action.
Yeah.
So there must be a political appetite for what you're describing.
Political appetite this year? So this is a question for Brittany. Will this eventually come to LDDRC for a vote?
No, it won't, because the amendment area is outside of
Okay,
lower downtown
'Cause-
and the special ordinance.
because my concern is just on documentation and making sure that this body doesn't look like we fell asleep at the wheel. Because my concern is Auraria was allowed to do what they wanted to do, which impacted the view plane, which rendered it obsolete. And I wanted to make sure that in the documentation, it said that that was outside of our purview. And it wasn't something that we overlooked. It just was something that we couldn't look at. I don't want someone to be looking through records and going, oh, city fell asleep at the wheels. Like, no, that was outside its purview. It's just a documentation thing, is all, but it's not coming to us.
Yeah, I think you're okay, because Auraria is outside of our purview. There will be no change to the view plane inside the 4th Special Review District in lower downtown, where you do have purview.
Well, and this doesn't, there's no changes to that 4th Special Review District. All of that is still. To me, it's a discussion item, it's an information item, but it's not anything that we really have any
Yep.
say or
It's not
direction
coming
on.
back to
It's all friendly recommendations.
discussion.
As I said, we don't normally
Yeah.
do public comment, but it's up to you as
Yeah.
the commission.
Does anybody have objections if I open it to the public? Okay, we'll open up the discussion item to the public. So if there's anybody virtually, I see Dick Farley has, or anyone here in the public who'd like to speak. We'll jump on to Mr. Farley virtually first. Taylor's moving you over, so as soon as you're able, Dick, you should be able to unmute.
Got it. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak. I'm a co-chair of the Lodo District, Inc. The two things I'd like to say. One is that I think that the HUED is essentially obsolete in itself when the view plane is no longer functional. The HUED, I think, needs to be revised. That would give you the the design guidance to then eliminate or at least cut out the view plane within the HUED, because the HUED is based on that view plane. At least there's another view plane that it's based on too that's gone. But that's not a real view plane. That's just a view of the Tivoli Brewery. So I think the HUED really needs to get revised. Really ought to focus on that. And once you get that done, then you can cut out the view plane from the HUED. I know that there's a PUD there, and I think that if the HUED is revised, then that PUD could then be revised similarly, or at least you can negotiate to get it revised. I'm just arguing for a future work item. Thank you.
Thank you, Dick.
Can I ask a question? Have you studied affected properties? How many properties really are affected anymore by this view plane? If Auraria is exempt and the CPV district then is exempt, there can't be that many remaining properties, but I think the concern being that Francois outlined is, there are just a handful that may not be resourced like a KSE to go through that kind of effort to, mitigate the view plane. So it's, I think I'll just echo what Fred said, that taking a harder look at how to sort of fairly address it if it is truly obsolete.
Yeah.
Important.
So that's actually one of the first steps that we took almost 2 years ago, was looking at every parcel within the view plane. What is its current zoning? What plan guidance would give it potentially future zoning that's different from that? And then looking at, so what are the maximum heights within that zoning? Are those under the view plane? Are they above the view plane? And so if it was above the view plane, then we said like, oh, this is a property that would, have sort of increased entitlement if the view plane were removed. And we did try to mark out like, what are all of those properties? And you're right, it's not that many. There are a lot of properties that sort of have like CMX5, CMX8 that are kind of at or under what their allowed heights would be. And so really we wouldn't be changing the entitlement of those properties much. Where it really did change property entitlement was out in the stadium district, which is where we don't have design standards and guidelines, where there might be potential for 200-foot buildings, things like that. And so there were a handful of properties that brought up some some questions and some hesitation, but you're right, it's not a huge amount of the property given how much Auraria owns and how much KSE owns.
We did have another gentleman wishing to speak from the public, so I'm gonna invite you to You can start with your name, please, for the record.
Thank you. Good morning, Jerry Orton, and my wife Jamie. I'm on the All Arena Benefits Agreement Committee, and also President Lower Downtown Neighborhood Association and a board member on the Lodo District. And we were very fortunate to have Tony come and present this particular consideration of a guidance and design guidelines as to the Ball Arena site at a board meeting of the Neighborhood Association. Thanks so much for that, Tony. I think what I would add a couple things. I understand that the old City Hall was demolished in the 30s and that this view plane ordinance was established in the 50s. I think it's kind of, the view plane ordinance is kind of like a recognition of, oops, we lost a really significant building. And now we're doing this to try to kind of, recapture that. But, if you stand there at the Bell, the view is not extraordinary. I don't know that it's ever been. If you were on the first floor of the old City Hall, on the second floor of the old City Hall, third, fourth, or you went in that tower, it would have been phenomenal. That would have been a phenomenal view. But now it's not a view at all. We rode by there today because 14th Street is excellent bike lane. And, you don't look over where you're, that's not a view you look at. I mean, the views that you look at there are some great views in Denver for sure. And so I think there's a context here is that when this was adopted, it was adopted, I think, in kind of a regret mode for having lost the old City Hall. The other thing I would add is I have spoken to Amanda Sandoval with regard to the Ball Arena site and the work of the Backpack Committee and even this particular proposal. And one of the things that she shared with me is that the precedent of making a view plane obsolete might play throughout Denver in ways which have a lot of repercussions. And so I think there's some favor, at least with that city council member, in these limited approaches to it. And this whole approach is one which, subject to the community benefits agreement being achieved with Cronky, we're very much in favor of this limitation on the view ordinance.
We don't have a motion, so is there any further discussion about this item?
Let's get all those standards and guidelines done and then get it.
All right, great, thank you. I'll close the discussion item. Is there anything else for today?
Anything else for today?
All right, well, I will adjourn today's meeting at 9:08 a.m. Thank you, everybody.
This is
Maybe
just-
see each other next month.
This is just a rando topic now that we're out.